This podcast is sponsored by SoFi to help you get your money right and is for informational purposes only. Nothing in this program is a recommendation from SoFi to you or any listener. You should not rely on this program for any financial advice or legal or tax advice. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the institutional views of SoFi or its affiliates.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the important part. Before we start this episode, quick announcement. I want to let you all know that we're going to be taking a few months off, mostly because I am going on maternity leave. I am becoming a mama. So we're going to take a few months off. We're going to go back to the drawing board, figure out how to make this even better for you when I return. In the meantime, we're going to be re-releasing some of our favorite episodes, and we'll be back later this year. This is the important part. I'm Liz Thomas, head of investment strategy at SoFi. Today, we're talking to Anthony Noto, CEO of SoFi. When he took the job at SoFi, he told the board, it's a matter of when, not if, we become a top 10 financial institution. And every decision he makes is positioning SoFi to get there. Under his leadership, SoFi became a bank, surpassed $2.5 billion in revenue, and has grown to over 10 million members. Before joining SoFi, Anthony was CFO and COO of Twitter. He started his career as a brand manager at Kraft Foods, then became an associate at Lehman Brothers, had a couple of stints at Goldman Sachs, and with time as a CFO of the NFL in between. He's a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point and got his MBA from the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School. Anthony, welcome to the important part.
Well, thank you for having me, Liz.
So we're going to start at the beginning. This is our listeners' opportunity to get a behind-the-curtain look at our fearless leader. We're going to start right from the top with childhood. And you grew up in Poughkeepsie, New York. It took me a long time to figure out how to say that word. But you grew up in Poughkeepsie, New York, and come from humble beginnings. This is something that you and I share in common. I was raised by a single mom. I know you were raised by a single mom. My mom and I were on welfare for the first couple years of my life, and just being raised by her and even her being the breadwinner after she got married for my entire childhood, I know that influences me and how I work and how I view money. So I'd love to hear from you how your early childhood and the rest of your upbringing influences your leadership style and how you view money.
You know, I do think it kind of builds the foundation of a lot of attributes, hard work and grittiness, et cetera. We didn't have a lot of money early in my childhood. As we became teenagers and young adults, my mom really emphasized a couple of key things. One, she believed that you should have 2 years' salary in cash, put it under your mattress in case for a rainy day. She didn't necessarily trust banks. She didn't necessarily understand investing, but she knew that if you had 2 years' salary in cash, that was enough time to find a way to get to the next job, the next opportunity. We weren't allowed to get our license until we could buy our own car and pay for our own insurance and our own gas, which was her way of saying, this isn't going to be a privilege that you get just because you turn 16. You have to figure out how to afford all the elements of what it takes to be a driver type of thing. We always had to work, even though we played sports. I played football, hockey, baseball. I road crew in the summer. So there wasn't a lot of time to have a job. And if I wasn't forced to pay for those things or have a job, I likely would not have. And, some of those jobs as a teenager and young adult kind of gave me a very strong impression of what I didn't want to do for the rest of my life, not because it wasn't admirable, but because it was hard and backbreaking. And that motivated me quite significantly to do well in school. And it also motivated what college education I wanted to go seek and where to go for that matter.
Yeah, well, and time management too, right? When you think about time management, even just as a high schooler, take me through like a day. I mean, it almost seems like you have to be an adult before you're really an adult, right? And then you get to college and you're sort of an adult, and after college then you really are an adult. But it begins before that. So take me through even just a day as like a regular high schooler, trying to work, trying to play sports, trying to manage your own finances.
Sure. I mean, I don't remember this crystal clear, but I do have a recollection. I think we got out of school in high school around 2:00 in the afternoon. I think we had to be on the football field or ice or baseball field probably by 3:00. Practice was typically 2.5 hours. I could remember leaving, school after showering and so forth around 6:30, getting home around 7, eating dinner. And I used to try to do a couple of hours of homework every night. Obviously, we didn't have the internet and social media when I was in high school in 84, 85, 86. So talk on the phone for, 45 minutes with my friends, girlfriend, whatever, may be going on in my life personally. That was sort of Monday through Friday. For non-baseball, for hockey and football, we played on the weekends mostly. And so that was either Friday or Saturday. And I would work all day Sunday during the school year. I worked originally in a garden center and then a butcher shop for most of high school, waiting on both customers, but making sausage and cleaning out chicken bins and some unattractive types of work like that. So also worked at a civic center, helping at concessions for events that would take place at night, like concerts or wrestling or other things. And always sort of had my hand in some type of, hourly job doing construction with friends of the family or some of my own friends that did that for a living. And sometimes I was building a house. Sometimes I was putting up a fence. Sometimes it would be just cleaning out the junk in people's yards. So, when it snowed, I would go out and shovel snow for $20 a driveway, mow the lawns of other people, et cetera. All different ways to get gas money for, dates or money for stuff on weekends with my buddies.
Glamorous, all the glamorous stuff. And this gives new meaning to one of our core values: be gritty, be accountable, right? To be scrappy about it, just get money wherever you can, and you do what you got to do to survive, particularly in that time in life. So let's talk about West Point. You went to college at West Point grad. Was that a childhood dream? Was going to West Point a childhood dream, or was that something that came about later that was an idea?
Came about in the summer between my 8th grade year and my freshman year in high school. My older brother was trying out for the Empire State Games for a sport called team handball. The tryouts were, it's an Olympic sport. The tryouts were at West Point. I'd never been to West Point. I'd heard about it. My stepdad, asked me if I would go with my older brother and him to the tryouts. I didn't want to go. I was 12 or 13 years old. I was going to hang out with my buddies. And it was really the first thing my stepdad said I really needed to do, quite frankly. So I went with them down to the tryouts. It turned out that they needed a few more players. And as most 13-year-olds, I had on gym shorts and a T-shirt and basketball sneakers.
You were ready.
So they asked me if I would hop in and play. And I did, and I ended up making the team. And, that team trained with, we were a high school scholastic division. The open division was for people out of high school. The majority of the people that were in the open division team for the Hudson Valley were West Point cadets. So I got to spend the summer training for the Empire State Games in August, hanging out with these, great role models. They were, in great shape. They were good looking. They were well-spoken. They played incredibly hard. They were always in great shape. And that was sort of my first exposure to West Point. And I started to appreciate that it was more than an education. It was about building a leader. And you majored in something. I majored in mechanical engineering. And yes, it gave you a bachelor's of science degree. But at the end of the day, it's really about helping you become and building a strong foundation for leadership. And so that, and the combination of being recruited for football and baseball there, I decided I wanted to go to West Point at a pretty early juncture in high school. I think when I was a freshman, I said I wanted to either go to West Point to play football or Notre Dame to play football. And since Notre Dame wasn't recruiting a 6'2", relatively good athlete, but not fast, quick, with a rocket arm quarterback from Hyde Park, New York, I ended up going to West Point.
Little did they know that you had the grit to, what's the story? You tore both of your ACLs on the same play and continued to play through the rest of that game and maybe the rest of the season or the rest of your career at West Point?
It is.
Do I have that right?
A little bit correct, a little bit folklore.
Okay.
I did tear both my ACLs on the same play. I did not continue playing in that particular game.
Oh,
it was pretty dramatic. I got carried off the field. That was in our spring game, I think in April. And then I did play the following fall. I didn't miss any practices or games. And the following year is my senior year. And then had my knees reconstructed in January after my senior football season.
wow. Well, see, Notre Dame missed out. Okay, well, you talk about West Point a lot in shaping your leadership style. Can you give us a couple things? What are the principles that you really learned there that still drive a lot of your leadership today?
I mean, there's just so many leadership principles that are taught, but also just learned. Lead by example is one of the most important leadership attributes to have, because if you're going to ask other people to follow you and ask them to make sacrifices and give a certain level of effort or live by a certain code, then you have to display that first and be a role model for them. I've always loved lead, follow, or get out of the way. Don't try to halfway lead or halfway follow. You got to be either in front or behind, but you can't really be in the middle. Ensuring a task is understood, supervised, and accomplished is another leadership principle we were taught. Be technically and tactically proficient, which basically says know your shit and don't try to take the easy way and cut corners. There's a number of other things that you learn about planning, where not only do you have to have a plan, but you need to make sure the plan's understood. You need to make sure you have the necessary resources. And most importantly, you have contingency plans, because whatever you start off with as the plan is ultimately not going to be what's going to allow you to be successful. You will face some level of adversity, some level of setback, some unexpected thing. And if you don't have a plan, it's really hard to pivot or overcome those challenges or go to plan B. And so having contingencies is critically important. And then the last thing is, there's more things to do than time to do it and resources to do it in. So you have to be able to prioritize and decide what are the most critical things and prioritize those above the less critical things, so that you're allocating your time to getting what's most critically done. One of the things I used to joke about, I just remembered, is, at West Point, you have to do well in school. Everyone's an athlete. All cadets are athletes. So you have to play either core squad sports, Division I sports, or club sports, or intramurals. And you have to do a bunch of military stuff. And you get graded on all three. When you leave West Point, your ranking is based on academics, athletics, and on military. And when people used to ask me, like, why were you so successful in the classroom and on the football field? And I'd say, well, I decided I was going to get C's, the letter C, in shining my shoes and cleaning my room, and get A's in the classroom and A's on the football field. Because when I'm 35 or 40 and I'm interviewing for a job, no one's going to ask me what grades I got on shining my shoes or cleaning my room, but they're certainly going to ask me how I did academically. And clearly football is another measure of different attributes that are critical to an organization.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and I've had a number of athletes on the podcast, and they've been awesome. And I have always wondered, what is it? And I welcome your opinion on this. What is it about athletes and what you learn as an athlete that makes people so much more successful in business? It seems like there's been quite a few people that have crossed over and been really good at that. So there's got to be something about athletics or team mentality or whatever the case may be that really set people up for success.
I think the biggest thing is that if you're going to compete at a high level in sports, you have to be able to overcome challenges. You have to be able to fight and be gritty and get up 9 times and knock down 8. You have to be willing to put in the time outside of practice to get better. Otherwise, you're not going to get better every day. And it's a demanding environment, one in which you have to wake up every day and get better than you were the day before. And that constant improvement requires a plan. It requires motivation. It requires, setting goals. So I think that's one critical element. I think the second one is being a great team player. In the world of business, you are not going to succeed if you're an individual and you're not a great team player. Sometimes that means you have to give selfless service. Sometimes that means you have to lead from the front. But you have to figure out what puzzle piece you are in that bigger picture to help the team reach success. And that's also very hard to do. But athletics is a great way of teaching you. And then, the actual performance itself is under pressure. The other team, they work just as hard. They have the same level of skill, if not more. And you have to be able to perform under pressure and perform in situations where it's not easy to deliver.
Yeah. You're a Wharton MBA and famously did not take a finance class until you got to grad school. So self-taught investor before that. And I think many of the investors listening to this, we have a big individual investor audience, and a lot of SoFi members are self-taught investors. So what are some guiding principles that you followed before you ever took a formal finance class? Because I think that's a really important thing for people to hear. And anybody out there who's intimidated by the industry because they don't have the formal training, I'm here to tell you, you don't necessarily need it. And I think you would agree with me, but you do have to have some principles. You do have to have some sort of plan in place, some sort of financial planning and idea of what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I'd say the first thing, and I did this when I was, I think 17 or 18 years old, you have to do the research. You have to do your homework. So I had worked as I mentioned, I worked not just to be able to buy a car and pay for insurance and gas. I worked also to be able to pay for college if I had to pay for college. And so I had saved a couple $1,000s, but knew I was going to West Point, and everyone goes for free. And so I wanted to invest that money, and I went to an advisor, and she had me put the money into a couple of mutual funds. And in October of 1987, there was a huge market crash, and I learned what it was like to lose a lot of money, not knowing what you invested in or why, because I just took her advice at face value. I then started reading about growth investing and about 20th Century and Janus and all these other companies in Money Magazine, and started to do my homework and understood the different types of mutual funds you could invest in that time, and looking at 3-year and 5-year performance as opposed to 1 year. And so I started in a diversified way, but following people that had great track records. And then from there, I started to learn more about individual stocks and became a disciple, so to speak, of the Peter Lynch theory of investing what you know and what you like, but doing research behind that. And, that was kind of build the foundation of my interest. And I think, SoFi launched fractional shares, and I think it's the perfect vehicle to get people into the market with low risk, not a lot of exposure, but a high level of learning. You can literally take $10 and buy $1 of 10 different stocks of companies that you use their product, and follow what they're doing, read about them every day, see how the stocks perform, watch CNBC, and before you know it, you'll start to understand what things matter in driving stocks and how you can do your own homework. And with the internet and AI and all the individual publishers of financial information, you can do a really great job in investing today. I largely invest in ETFs now. I have obviously a large exposure to SoFi, some of which I bought a meaningful amount of which I've bought on my own. It's very rare that I'll buy an individual stock today, just because I think you can get such diversified performance consistently from strong ETFs.
Yeah. And I think it's important too for people to understand, the research that you do and all of the information that's available. There's a benefit, and sometimes there's a drawback. The benefit is that we have all of this information for free at our fingertips. And as investors, that was not always the case. It makes the industry so much more accessible. And then, as you mentioned, fractional shares, things that companies like SoFi do to allow people to really have freedom in their investing. The drawback can sometimes be that because there's so much information, it's this constant stream, it tricks you into thinking that you're supposed to do something about it every single time something changes. So we always have to keep in mind that long-term view as well, and know that there's going to be bumps along the road. Your story about 1987 is a good one. All of us that have lived through a couple of recessions have had those bumps in the road, and you have to live through that, and you have to live through some of the little market corrections that happen along the way as well.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's shift over to career. So I'm going to do a really abbreviated summary of your career. It went something like this: Kraft Foods brand manager, Lehman Brothers analyst, equity research at Goldman as the #1 ranked internet analyst, CFO of the NFL, second tour of duty at Goldman, leading the telecom, media, and tech investment banking team, CFO, then COO of Twitter, and then CEO of SoFi in 2018. That's quite the story. Quite the trajectory. How much of it was intentional? How much of it was accidental? How much of it was a surprise? Walk us through the path.
Yeah, I think very little of it was intentional. A lot of it was opportunities that came along that I evaluated, frankly, in a way that turned out to be pretty beneficial to me. The biggest thing that was intentional was Kraft Foods. When I was getting out of the Army, I wasn't sure what I was going to do or what I could do. And I worked with what they call JMO recruiter, junior military officer recruiting firm. They helped me understand what jobs were available for people coming out of the military with my background. I was a mechanical engineering major undergrad, and I knew I'd probably never use that specific degree in a role like mechanical engineering, but it would serve as the foundation of proving I was very analytical, creative, I could be a good problem solver, et cetera. As I talked to the recruiter, I finally just said to him, what's a job that only like 5% of the people coming out of the military could get? And he mentioned brand management. And he gave me a name of a book to read, which I read over that weekend, called Brand Equity by David Akers. And I got exposed to this type of, management approach and company organization that P&G started as a brand manager. Kraft Foods replicated, and others have replicated it. And so I called him back and said, hey, I want to be a brand manager at one of these places. How do I do that? What do I have to, learn to get there? And that's how I ended up at Kraft Foods as a brand manager. And it really taught me the foundation of business from an operator standpoint. How do you manage a P&L? How do you develop a value proposition? How do you go to market? How do you develop the distribution strategy, the promotional strategy, the product design, and the awareness of that product, and then obviously the operations to build it. But it made me realize that I didn't have a lot of the academic pieces behind my instincts. I didn't have a lot of the, educational elements that would teach you about these different things and the theory. And so that gave me a desire to go to business school, which I did. And at business school, I started to realize there were other careers where I could leverage my skill set that was very appropriate for brand management, but also appropriate to different roles on Wall Street to different degrees. And that's what led to my desire to become a equity research analyst. And then after that, opportunities just presented themselves given the job of an equity research analyst. You're getting to know companies very well. You're getting to know investors very well, which is what led to the NFL opportunity. We're going into 2008 when I got the call about the NFL CFO role. I had a very negative outlook in the fall of 2007 that I got a lot of negative reviews for because it was a little bit too early about what we saw ahead. And I learned from the, tech bubble bursting in the early part of the decade and took a negative view in the fall of 2007 about the economy and about advertising. The NFL called, and I kind of saw it as somewhat of a dream job, quite frankly. I love sports. I love football. I love the business of sports. And it was a chance for me to learn how to be a CFO and see if I liked it. And if it was something I liked doing, I could stay there. I could obviously go to another company, public company as a CFO, but I always could go back to some place like Goldman. And I really enjoyed my time there. I learned a ton. We got a lot accomplished. I think we did all the deals for the next 10 years while I was there and changed a lot about the economic foundation across the league that set them up well for the strategy that we built back then to be $25 billion by 2028 in revenue. And I'm proud to say that when we presented that, we were a long way away from 25 billion, but Roger and team have really made great progress since I left, and they'll likely get there in 2028 as planned.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love that. Well, I have an uncle. My uncle John was a mechanical engineer and spent his entire career at Kraft. So I think it's a great story. It was a great start for him. It was a great start and a great finish. And I know that he really enjoyed his time there. What one of those jobs was the hardest? And I ask that because what I've found through my career so far is that some of the jobs that I found the most challenging were the ones that maybe I wasn't as naturally good at, and I had to force myself. I had to learn. I had to push myself harder, and I ended up learning more from those jobs that I actually found more challenging naturally. So which one of those is that something that you've had an experience with, or which one of those jobs was the hardest?
They're all hard.
That's not a fair answer.
No, I mean, I was, as you were asking the question, I was thinking through in my head, they're all hard. Like the Army's incredibly hard. And it's not just hard because you're out in the woods, or you're deployed, or you're away from, your family. It's hard because you're responsible for 40 people and their lives. Mm-hmm. It's hard because you have to kiss your wife and daughter goodbye to go to some far off place where you may not come back from it. It's hard because there's not enough time or resources to get done what needs to get done. And you're on the hook to make those decisions. And it's hard because, people that you're out there in the foxhole with, so to speak, end up developing cancer, and you're there. They have no family. They have no one else to talk to. And you as their leader become their family. And, that there so many things about the Army taught me skills and emotions and capabilities I could have never guessed. And I couldn't be more thankful to have served my country. It's funny, people will say, thank you for your service. And every time they say it, I think to myself, hell, I should be thanking you. It was a privilege to be given that responsibility at such an early age. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And I just thank God that it went well. And, we were able to, do a great job and get through some of those trying circumstances. Craft food was hard. I was in a group that was predominantly women coming out of the military. And I was a son of a woman that was a very hard old school Italian with, 2 brothers. And I had to figure out how to speak differently, to have different interests, to find, a way to interface with other people that had different interests than I had. And I started reading about things I never would have read about, or caring about things so I could be part of the conversation. And, the business part of that wasn't hard. It was assimilating into I was in the salad dressing category, and my group was predominantly all women. I was definitely the minority as a male. Goldman was hard. The tech bubble bursting, surviving that was hard. The financial crisis at the NFL was hard. Living through the last 7 years at SoFi and all the challenges we've had is hard. So I like to say we like hard because it wouldn't be worth it if it was easy.
That's absolutely true. My dad was a coach his whole career, and he always said if it was easy, it wouldn't be any fun.
That's right.
So all of those stops along the way contributed to your leadership style, I imagine, today. How would you characterize your leadership style?
In different roles, it requires different levels of leadership. But at its essence, I'd like to work with our team on establishing what our goals are, then what we're going to prioritize against those goals, asking the team to then go off and build plans. And I'm there just to facilitate, to make sure those plans are thought through completely, that they're well-resourced, but letting the team go and execute and being there to help them solve problems or eliminate blockers. And, that's very different than earlier in my career, and when I was actually making the decisions every day and running the businesses. And so my leadership style, I hope people see it as a collaborative style. Like I set the mission for the company, I set the strategy, I help set the priorities, but it's a participative process where we get buy-in. I think the best way to describe my leadership philosophy is to look at our core values. If you look at our 11 core values, that's what I believe it takes to be a great leader. That's what I believe it takes to be a great teammate. That's what I believe it takes to have a great culture. In addition to that, we talk about a founder's mentality, which I think is unique to being a technology company and unique to an innovative company. And we have defined what a founder's mentality is. And being the gold standard of that founder's mentality is part of my leadership style as well.
Yeah. And everybody out there should know the other behind the curtain view is, as a leadership team, we begin all of our offsite meetings. We get together twice a year. We begin all of our offsite meetings with a reminder of what that founder's mentality is. And actually, a couple meetings ago, you made us all read a book called The Founder's Mentality. So we can't forget it. It is front and center all the time. And I will say the other thing about working at SoFi is this is the 4th company I've been at in my career. Those values that you mentioned, a lot of companies have values. A lot of companies have a mission statement. I could go back at some of those companies that I've worked for. I have no idea what those were. But we talk about ours every day. They are in most meetings. We use it in performance reviews. It's hard to not know what our values are. It's hard to not know what our mission is. And I think that is something that's really important as a company, because I've never been at a company that really lives true to those values and sees them every single day in their work.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you pointing that out, Liz.
Yeah, of course. So one of the themes of our podcast guests is that many of them are very high stakes decision makers, which obviously you are. It is impossible to know whether or not you're making the right choice, right? You can never be 100% sure that you're making the right decision. So How do you get to the place where you feel like you're making the best decision about a lot of things?
Yeah, and I mean, this has evolved over the last, 25 years for sure. Today, I like to go to a first principles sort of concept. And, we use a decision-making framework at SoFi called DACY, and I think it's a great framework to help people that aren't in the business of making decisions every day. And I think it's a great framework in companies that are moving very fast and innovating significantly. So I like to start with the principles, like what is the criteria that we believe is the correct criteria to use as a decision-making mechanism. And then against those principles or that criteria, what are the choices and how does each choice compare against those principles? And if you go through that process, you're going to 90% of the time know the answer without having to individually make the decision. What's critical, though, in the how you do that is that you bring in all of the contributors that can have a point of view on those principles so that you debate them and you have a very thorough process of what, has been referred to as getting to the truth. Let's make sure we have all the data, all the perspectives when we're deciding what these principles are. And if you're not willing to have that debate and you're not willing to get to the truth, I am 100% certain you'll fail 100% of the time. But if you're comfortable bringing in the contributors and bringing in the thought leaders and the people that could have the best perspectives, and you want all of them, then you're going to have a very high probability of picking the right principles. And then if you're truthful yourself and you look at the data and you compare the choices against those principles and it becomes obvious, then you have a really good probability of being successful in how you're making decisions and how you're allocating resources and how you're managing risks. And so that's the frameworks that, we use at the company and what I use. I often will say to someone that's in their late 30s, if I was the 35-year-old or 37-year-old Anthony Noto, I would probably have said, here's the answer and here's why, and not had the patience and the desire to go through that debate, to go through that participative process. But I have found through a lot of scars, a lot of lessons learned, that the organization is stronger and better at driving towards an objective and executing against a plan to go through that process. In addition to everyone being more motivated because they participated in that process and they understand it, they will fight harder to break through walls when things get put in front of them. And most importantly, you're actually making the best decision on the best information you can have. So that's how I think about it.
One of the last things when you talk about the contributors and making sure that everybody's viewpoints are incorporated, you have to have quality contributors. And that means that you have to build teams that are successful at what they're doing. And you've built a number of teams over many years. What's a hiring rule or instinct that you've lived by?
The most simplest concept, which is what are your goals? And do those goals tie to the company's goals? And if your individual goals tie to the company's goals, then you are going to be highly motivated to help us achieve where we want to go, because it's going to help you achieve to where you want to go. And so that's an important tenet in hiring people. Yes, you want them to be a culture carrier, subject matter expert, evidence of that. You want them to have a skill set in terms of being a great leader, a culture carrier, a persistent person that has grit, team player, creativity, analytical ability, all those skills and so forth. But if they have all of those things and they check all those boxes and their goals personally and professionally are not tied to the company's goals, that person will not be as successful.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I love it. All right, let's talk about SoFi specifically for a little bit. This is your first CEO role. Now you've been in it for, you mentioned 7 years, but what's something about being a CEO that has surprised you?
As COO at Twitter with Jack as the CEO, I thought I knew what it was like to be CEO. Jack was in charge of product and I was in charge of the rest. And we had a staff as well, but that's how we divvied up the responsibilities. And I felt like, when you have that broad of responsibility of the company, I'm like, yeah, my CEO job's not going to be very different than my COO job. And it is. It's very different. That last mile between COO and CEO, it's unknowing for a COO to know. It's unknowing for anyone that's not been a CEO. You have to make the final decision in a lot of cases as a CEO, whereas a COO, yeah, you can have a strong point of view, but at the end of the day, the person in charge is really making some of the tougher decisions. That's one thing I learned. The second thing is it's not as easy to make people changes as the CEO as it is in other jobs. And the reason why is because you're trying to build a team, a high morale. You want to build a team that has great esprit de corps. You want to build a team that's very cohesive. And if you're firing people too quickly or letting people go or changing direction too fast, no one's going to feel safe. No one's going to feel like they can fail. No one's going to feel like they can express their point of view. And so while instinctively you may recognize that it's time to make a change with a specific leader, you have to be very thoughtful that you've actually exhausted all the necessary avenues about improving that person's performance or communicating to that person that it's not up to where it needs to be and giving them a development plan. Because if you don't, then it's just going to create a morale issue throughout the company that's not positive. It's not a great culture. So I used to be in Jack's ear all the time. Hey, we need to get rid of so-and-so and change this person or go this direction. And like, I had, I was very decisive in Jack's ears. After being at SoFi for like 3 months, we had dinner. I said, Jack, I'm so sorry. I said, what are you sorry for? I said, I'm sorry for not appreciating why you were slow to make some of the changes you made. And slow is not even a fair word. Why you were so thoughtful in making some of those decisions. I now appreciate that I can't fire everyone at a moment's notice just because they failed or just because they think differently or because they may not be prioritized in the same way as the CFO wants them to or the other team members. So I think that's one of the biggest differences, that like you can corrupt a company in 10 seconds if you're not thoughtful of how you take care of other people.
Yeah, and that failure point is an important one too. It's not one that's explicitly in our values, but we have a value called iterate, learn, innovate. And one of the things I've heard you say many times over the years is people are encouraged to fail fast, which I think you hear that as an employee here and you're like, what does that mean? Encourage me to fail. Encourage to fail fast and then learn from it. Right? Iterate, go on to the next step, do it better the next time, but do it quickly so that you can learn from it and get better fast. And I think that that's something that is refreshing. It certainly was for me coming here. Another thing that I've heard you say many times is that you go to bed scared and wake up terrified. And I think a couple times I've heard that example in the sense of the fear that a competitor would do it better, a competitor would do it faster, a competitor would do it cheaper. Tell us about that phrase, and then do you still feel that way? Or do you feel like SoFi has come such a long way in the last 7 years that you don't go to bed quite as scared and wake up quite as terrified?
Well, first, just for clarification, I would say that statement is something I've said throughout my career. So it's not unique to SoFi. I said that when I was at Twitter and I was at the NFL and Goldman. It's more a statement about, I know the things that are in my control and I'm focused on those. It's the things that are not in my control, such as competitor activity, regulators in our case now, law, there's other factors in other positions. But, those unknowable things are typically the things that cause me to stay up at night. They're the things that cause me to be terrified because those are the things that you can't prepare for. And those are the things you have to react to. And it's unknowing. So I try to leave no stone unturned every day so that I can go to sleep and put my head on the pillow and have a good night's sleep, knowing I've done everything I could. That doesn't mean I don't wake up worried about what the new day brings and what is going to happen that's unexpected. I sent to the SoFi leadership group that you referenced before a message I saw on my Twitter feed last night that literally talks about this concept of getting better every day, waking up and being better every day. And if you do that and you leave no stone unturned and you're exhausted every day, then you will put your head down and be able to sleep fine at night. And this is a tweet that I sent out in 2023 in reaction to a quote by Woody Hayes along the same lines. And it was just so ironic that it hit my feed last night because the world's changing very quickly. The OCC put out an interpretive letter that now allows SoFi to be back in the crypto business. And I couldn't be more excited. Spent the whole weekend working my butt off and talking to dozens of people to make sure that we capitalize on this opportunity as fast as we possibly can. And so, it's a new day, and every day can be a new day. And that's a great example of waking up and not knowing what's going to happen. It turns out to be, I was elated when I saw that information. And I'm even more elated knowing what's in store for us in front of us in terms of cryptocurrencies.
What do you expect fintech to look like 5 years from now? And how does how does AI play into that?
Well, first, I think fintech, just like retail and travel and media, is going to be a winner take most area. And that means the digital companies, the winners in the digital world, in the technology world, will take most of the riches. I think it will differ by category. I think SoFi is positioned to be the winner that takes most in the one-stop shop. Robinhood is positioned to be the best in taking the most in just pure brokerage and trading and investing. What they do outside of that is yet to be seen. I think Affirm is great at buy now, pay later, but there's also Klarna and Block in that regard. But I think the companies that are leaders in their specific sectors today will end up being those leaders in the future. I think it's very hard to change colors overnight. So I think the strong will get stronger. I think there will be consolidation among those that are not strong, those that can't be the super scalar leaders like we will be. And I do think AI will drive tremendous amount of innovation. I think it's a platform level type of change. It'll definitely help us achieve our mission much easier. In order for us to help people get their money right, we need to be a one-stop shop. But we also need to be able to take all the data we have on people and answer 3 questions every day. What must they do that day in their financial life to get their money right? What should they do that day in their financial life to get their money right? And what could they do? And AI is a great way to deliver those answers. I think AI will be a critical element in reducing fraud, providing better trust, better safety and soundness. I think it will also be a great tool in driving more personalization and more innovation more broadly on products and services. I think cryptocurrency is also now in the forefront as another platform that will drive tremendous amounts of innovation that impact the next 5 years. And we hope to be squarely at the center of that hurricane, so to speak.
So you may have already answered this, but last question, what excited you the most about joining SoFi in 2018, and what excites you the most today about it?
I had a front row seat to seeing the disruption of the retail industry, the media industry, the travel industry. And it was obvious to me that no one had truly done to the financial services what the leading technology companies had done to those other industry groups. And the reason why no one had truly done that had a lot to do with capital, had a lot to do with regulation. And those things scare off technology people. They don't scare me. I believe that our embracing of those elements is a competitive advantage. And I think our expertise in technology and our embracing those other 2 elements has allowed us to scale faster than anyone else. I just saw something on Twitter that showed we had the fastest growth rate over the last 7 years of any of the fintech companies measured by somebody. I think we were doing roughly $250 million of revenue when I got here, and we just finished 2024 with over $2.6 billion of revenue. So quite an accomplishment, but it's still day one. We've barely scratched the surface on the market share we're going to take, on the innovation that we're going to drive, and the disruption that we'll bring to the industry. So I couldn't be more excited about where we are, and the change that will happen over the next 5 years will be compounded relative to what we saw over the last 5 because of AI and cryptocurrency.
All right, well, that was the end of our regularly scheduled programming. Now we do a couple creative segments. These are lightning round, quick answer stuff. The first one is called The Word. You've said before that strategy requires having a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. So in one word, what is your big, hairy, audacious goal for SoFi?
I can't share a big, hairy, audacious goal or BHAG for SoFi, because if I do, then others are going to copy it.
Okay.
But what I will reiterate, which will ladder up to the BHAG, is that we want to be a top 10 financial institution measured by market cap in our country. We want to be a top 15 technology company measured by market cap. Those are long-term aspirational goals. It takes a lot to get there. You could apply multiples to those numbers to figure out what we have to get to in revenue and earnings and then members. But those are pretty audacious statements that people don't recognize how audacious they are until they back into the amount of revenue and profit you need to have to get to those market capitalizations. But I believe in my heart, it is ours for the taking. And it's a matter of when it happens, not if it happens.
Next one is the aha moment. Tell us about a time when a plan or decision wasn't working out, wasn't going according to plan, and the aha moment that helped you turn it back around.
I'll give you one that turned into an offensive stance. We were launching SoFi Money, and I kept going through all the points of difference, the differentiation, the value prop. And every time I came up with a new way of doing something, I was told we can't do that. FIS doesn't do that. FIS won't do that. This won't do that. We can't do it. And that's when I realized, oh my God, we are not going to achieve the vision that I have for this company if we don't own the technology. We have to own the technology. We can't rely on other people to own the core technology, the core capabilities. We have to control our own pace of innovation. We have to be able to control our own pace of testing. We have to own all the data. And that was a aha moment. And we were about to launch the product, which led to the acquisition of Galileo and the other moves we've made in the technology platform business. And, there's more to see there, more for us to do. And again, just scratching the surface.
Okay. Next one is the moonshot move. If you had unlimited money and no regulations holding you back, what is a fintech move that you'd make?
We would be much more aggressive in disrupting the existing payment rails across debit, credit, ACH, and other infrastructure plays. We'd be much more aggressive on the technology platform side, like unbelievably aggressive, and completely disrupting the incumbents across payments, the incumbents across deposits, the incumbents across the key underlying infrastructure that enables finance to happen in our country.
Okay. All right, last one. Unpopular opinion. What is a widely accepted truth in business that you completely disagree with?
I think a lot of investors and market participants think innovation is a result of a great idea. And that is not innovation. In fact, there's plenty of great ideas that have never unfolded or become a reality. I think the key to innovation is actually iteration. And when I first got to the company and I talked about launching products and I talked about those products being world-class, I emphasized that world-class is achieved not by a vision, but by a commitment to constantly iterating, testing, and learning. And that the light bulb is the best example of what iteration can lead to from an innovation standpoint. And the iteration that exists in the light bulb hasn't stopped. But the light bulb was it started as a combination of different scientific experiments until you came out with the right levels of resistance, the right current or voltage, the light filaments, where that thing lit and stayed lit with electricity. And so I'm a big believer that innovation is a direct result of iteration and learning. Sometimes that iteration and learning leads you to a different idea. So fractional shares is a good example. Now, fractional shares have been copied by everybody, but we pioneered it. But what caused us to do it? Well, we kept looking at what are the most popular stocks on SoFi? And we kept seeing Ford and General Electric. And I couldn't understand why they're the most popular stocks because we have a younger audience. Mm-hmm. And why wasn't Tesla and Amazon or Apple the most popular stocks? And it turned out they're the most popular because they were the lowest priced. They were $9 each. We were hitting new and novice investors. And those people didn't want to spend $2,000 they didn't have $2,000 to spend. And so that's what reinforced the innovation of fractional shares. And I can give you example after example of example where we've iterated on offerings to turn into a good innovation. And you'll see more and more of that. And so I think the misperception is the great idea. It's not. It's the iteration that leads to the actual idea becoming a reality. And typically the idea is different than the initial hypothesis or thesis.
Well, Anthony, thank you so much. That was a clinic in leadership. I learn something every single time that I hear you talk, and I'm sure our listeners appreciated all of the great viewpoints that you've shared.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
For more from me, read my weekly column every Thursday on the SoFi blog or follow me on X at Liz Thomas Strat. Follow The Important Part wherever you get your podcasts. The Important Part is produced by SoFi in partnership with Pod People.
This episode of The Important Part was recorded on March 11th, 2025. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the institutional views of SoFi or its affiliates. This program should not be copied, distributed, published, or reproduced in whole or in part or disclosed by any recipient to any other person without the express written consent of SoFi. Each name of any organization mentioned in this program is the property of the company to which it relates, is used here strictly for informational and identification purposes only, and is not used to imply any authority, ownership, or license rights between any such company and SoFi. The content of this program is not a recommendation from SoFi to you or any listener or recipient of this program, and is provided for informational purposes only. SoFi is not providing any financial, economic, legal, investment, accounting, or tax advice through this program, or to its recipient, and you and any person should not rely on this program for any advice. Investment decisions should be based on specific financial needs, goals, and risk appetite. SoFi has no obligation to provide updates or changes to the information in this program. Past performance of any investments mentioned does not guarantee future results, which may vary. Neither SoFi nor any of its affiliates makes any representation or warranty, express or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the statements or any information contained in this program. Any liability for any statements in this program is expressly disclaimed by SoFi. For additional disclosures related to the SoFi Invest platforms described above, please visit sofi.com/legal.